Now, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome on stage Commissioner Johannes Hahn, responsible for the European Neighbourhood policy and enlargement negotiations. So let me first of all say how very grateful we are that you have found time in your busy agenda to be with us today. I know that you just returned from Skopje, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, where you were on an official visit. And since the beginning of your mandate, you have really been a champion for Europe's neighborhood and really a champion in promoting stability and good governance and also economic development, which I know you always put a lot of emphasis on. But we also know that the neighborhood itself is experiencing extremely difficult conditions. And you've really, since the beginning of your mandate, have traveled tirelessly east and south and sometimes even further afield. So in this room, if there's anyone that knows about Europe's neighborhood, it's certainly you, the challenges, but perhaps also the opportunities. So I just mentioned in my introductory remarks that the world as we know it is changing profoundly. Obviously, you know that as well. But I was wondering if you could speak for a few minutes about what this is doing to our neighborhood. How is it changing? And because from where I sit, I oftentimes have the feeling that we're really surrounded by instability. And the question, of course, everyone's asking, can the EU really get a grip on this situation?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Secondly, I know there is always a feeling that there's a growing instability in our neighborhood, but I would say it was never differently. And quite the opposite. In a way, we have been able to have one or the other stabilization in our neighborhood, but of course there is an ongoing, so to say, challenge and task to try to influence the situation in our neighborhood. I think what has really changed is that in the past probably Europe either didn't care, ignored, was not able, you name it, or you think about it, to deal with its neighborhood, and we hide behind others, usually behind the US, and I think this has changed. This is the big difference. We are now, so to say, not only aware, but we take the responsibility in our own interest because we believe we know much better how the situation is in the neighborhood, what are the reasons for the one or the other conflict, for the protracted conflict, and how we can contribute with our knowledge, with our, so to say, specific informations and understanding. And therefore, I think we are best suited to deal, and I think it's in our own interest to deal with our neighborhood. And well, there are different challenges. I have been tasked by President Juncker when I came into this office to revise our neighborhood policy. We did it in the first year of our mandate, and I think one of the key elements of this reform was to introduce certain, so to say, you can call it keywords, but one of them is we need a tailor-made approach for each of our neighbors. We cannot, so to say, treat everyone the same, but we have really to see what are the reasons for one or the other difficulties in this or that country. Sometimes there are crossover regional problems which has to be tackled in an adequate manner, but decisive is to understand that a tailor-made approach is necessary. Respecting, and this is maybe an additional element we have introduced, our own interests, and match it with the interests of our neighbors, because this was also, I would say, a deficiency in the past that Europe didn't really, so to say, put at the table or have been aware or reflecting about its own interest. And this is certainly, first and foremost, stability in our neighborhood, because without stability in our neighborhood, I'm always saying either we export stability or we import instability. So this is simple, so the program and the task.
Very good. But nonetheless, I think that, I mean, we are in sort of a new era of geopolitical competition. And I think today countries like Russia, Turkey, or China play more of a role than maybe they have in the past. And our sort of traditional model of good governance, of rule of law, is it as powerful as it used to be? Or how are we dealing with this sort of geopolitical, geostrategic competition that I think some of us are feeling?
Well, first and foremost, I would say the Europeans should be much more self-confident. I mean, what we are able to produce is not nothing, quite the opposite. I mean, we manage to produce almost 1/4 of the world economic output by around 6% of population. We are able to finance almost 40% of, so to say, the global social allowances and things like that, and expenditures. And so I think we have achieved a lot, and it's now how we can, so to say, care that this can stay also for the future. In that respect, we are definitely in a global challenge, because today the G7 produce almost the same like the E7, and in I think 10 years the E7 will produce twice of the G7. And in that respect, so to say, the political standing in a global scale of Europe will definitely change, will definitely decline in the future, although we have an increase of exports and things like that, but compared to the others, which of course catch up, it's a rather modest increase. And therefore I think we should use the current situation, our current standing, and once again we are soft power. And soft power means we don't have, so to say, a real security lack. This is definitely a lack, and we have to work, and Federica Mogherini is doing so. There are discussions about European army, etc. I believe, like probably everybody, foreign policy without security policy cannot exist. So here we have certainly to do something. We are aware about it, but also in the future, so to say, the strength of Europe will always be the combination of economic, but also of a rule of law power, which is creating this attractiveness. Yeah? I mean, we have witnessed now for a couple of years migration waves, and they are not, they have not started, so to say, without any reasons. The reason is that Europe is very, very attractive for people from outside Europe, because we offer a combination of freedom for individuals and a very high living standard. And unfortunately, many Europeans don't see it, forget it, or are not aware about it, in particular in comparison to other parts of the world.
When we prepared this conference, we decided to sort of roughly divide the days. Today is more about hard power, and tomorrow more about soft power. And you rightly already mentioned it. I mean, Europe's always been associated with soft power, but is it working as well as it used to? Because, I mean, the EU was always very much seen as being able to export stability. Do we still have that soft power? Do we still have that capability? What do you sense?
Well, I think we have to also further improve our toolbox, our ability to use this toolbox, to use this soft power. And by the way, by the end of this week, we will have our biannual Eastern Partnership Summit here in Brussels. And one of the big debates ahead of this summit is, like always, the declaration. And of course, there are some of our Eastern partners would like to see a very clear European perspective, and some of our member states don't see this, at least immediately. So there are some discussions still ongoing. But I'm mentioning this simply that it proves how, so to say, attractive Europe is. But what we have to do and to improve in the future is really to pool what we are doing in a way that we can produce a political leverage. I'm always saying we are probably in many areas the biggest payer worldwide, for instance, when it comes to development aid and other things, but we are by far not yet even a real regional player. So I think we have to harmonize a little bit the payer and the player role in a way that we are moving towards, so to say, the magnitude of what we are paying. And here, I give you an example which I think is rather impressive. Because I believe for us, the Europeans, the biggest challenge in the next predictable future is Africa. And I'm happy that more and more Europeans, not only, so to say, the countries in the Mediterranean area, understand how relevant and influential the situation of Africa is for us, the Europeans. Keyword population growth and everything which is related to it. And here we have to say, because you have previously mentioned China, I don't know if many people know that Europe is, for more than 80 countries in the world, the most important trading partner. So if you deduct the Europeans from the overall number of states, more than 80 is almost half of the remaining states in the world. The Americans are only the most important trading partner for a little bit more than 20 countries, most of them in the Caribbean area. So this is not, I would say, a big player. And in Africa, we are, with a few exemptions, the most important trading partner, if you take Europe as a whole. And this is exactly, so to say, our weakness, that we are not a peer as a whole. And this is something we have to change. And I give you a very concrete example. Egypt, which is, I think, for us as Europeans, one of the 3 key neighboring countries, Ukraine, Turkey, and Egypt, because of size, population, geographical location, everything which is related to it. And I personally believe it will be the biggest challenge for us, because if we have a neighboring country which has a daily population growth of 7,000 people, meaning more than 2 million a year, this is definitely a potential threat for Europe if they are not able to cope with this. And for the time being, they are not able. They know it and they try to address this, and we will help them. And this leads me to the way how we can help. The IMF has recently provided a multi-annual loan to Egypt worth 12 billion euro. And for that, they have asked a lot of conditions. The Egyptians did it. Fine, perfect. By the way, 1/3 of this loan can be counted to the Europeans. Also, this is something we always forget. IMF is always perceived as it is a so-called Bretton Woods institution, an American institution, but the biggest shareholders are the Europeans. But so far, we never managed to, so to say, to use this power. Anyhow, these 12 billions were a game changer in Egypt. We, as European Union, as European Commission, I have a budget of around 100 million per year for Egypt, which is, you can imagine, not really a game changer. We are able to leverage it by using financial instruments to 600 to 800 millions, okay. But if I count together, and I did it, all the projects which are currently in Egypt under implementation, financed by us, member states, European financial institutions, we end up at an amount which is more than 11 billion euro. So more or less almost the same like the IMF loan, and also this is multi-annual. But we are today not able to use this in terms of a political leverage. And this is exactly, so to say, where we have to make progress, where it is decisive if we are able to make progress. And the same applies for all, or almost all the African countries. We and our member states and our financial institutions provide a lot of money to these countries, but, so to say, we are so far not able to coordinate ourselves in political terms. I'm not asking to get the money on our account and then I will deal with it. This would be naive. But what should be achievable is that we are able to coordinate ourselves, to pool ourselves in order to act and to speak with one voice in order to create political leverage with the aim to have the necessary changes which are indeed finally can address the so-called root causes, for instance, of migration.
But why is this so hard? I mean, you make it sound like a lot of the work actually needs to be done here rather than elsewhere. I mean, it's about how we organize ourselves as the EU. Why is this so difficult?
Well, there are traditions. I mean, we have some member states, big ones, it's not a particular secret, which have their own, so to say, international foreign policy interests related also to their own histories, etc., etc. And there is, by the way, a very interesting phenomenon, I would say, which we are also not able to use. I mean, some European countries have a very colonial past. But Europe as a whole doesn't have this, so to say, touch, this doesn't give an impression to be a colonial, so to say, institutions. Quite the opposite. This is why we are so attractive in a more and more multipolar world to deal with us, because we never give the impression we would like to expand our territories, etc. And this is one of our, another soft power, that we are not perceived internationally as a power which want to change everything, which want to influence, which want to gain territories, etc. So as a whole, we should really utilize our image, and I think this is the task of the next forthcoming years, that we so to say, our big players amongst the member states have to be aware about this. I always like to quote in that context one of our founding fathers, Henri Spark, who said already, I think around 1960, all European countries, almost 60 years ago, are small, but some of them don't know it. And I think this is today even more valid than 60 years ago. I'm not criticizing anybody, but we have to adapt to a changed, globalized situation.
Well, let me follow up on that, because I think traditionally when we worked on exporting stability, we had the United States by our side. What has changed? Can you speak a little bit about the role of the United States in our neighborhood?
Difficult to speak about the role currently. Probably nobody knows exactly what is the role. But I would say some people know me, and I am always saying I'm a party member of the half-full glass party, not of the half-empty. So in that respect, I think we should really, as Europeans, use the momentum really to care about our own interests. And we have started to do this, I think, very successfully, for instance, in the West Balkan region. And there we have quite a good coordination and cooperation with the US, and I think they are quite happy that we went into the lead, and this now should apply for other parts. Of course, on the other hand, some are not yet used that we are now more active, more dynamic, trying to push things forward. But also here it will be important, and next year the Commission will come forward, President Juncker, with a proposal. There are many, many areas where we could have in future a system of majority decisions instead of currently unanimous decisions, because the Treaty of Lisbon allows it in principle. Of course, member states have to agree finally to it, but there are some potentials, and I hope there is a growing understanding that we also have to change ourselves, we have to adapt ourselves, all of us, and it doesn't mean, when I was previously referring to the case of Egypt, that always, let's say, the Commission or the EEAS is in the lead. It could also be that one of our member states is acting on behalf of all of us in a situation where maybe one or the other member state has a particular knowledge about a certain country. But the important thing is it must and should be in a coordinated way and with one voice. And if this is achievable, then people should understand we can really become, also in political terms, a global player as a European institution.
Very good. I mean, before maybe we take a few questions, a quick word about Turkey?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of emotions, at least in some of our member states, and definitely in Turkey too. I think things have now calmed down, and I think it's important to understand that we need maybe a more rational approach to Turkey, like we need a rational approach to everybody. And in that context, I like to quote Wolfgang Schäuble, who once said, to rule is a rendezvous with the reality. Yeah? And I think because there are sometimes people saying, well, if a country is not respecting human rights, we should not deal with them, we should not work with them. Honestly, if this would be our line, we are rather insulated globally. Yeah? So we have to accept geography is destiny, and in that respect, as I said, Turkey is one of our key neighboring countries. We should have every interest as Europeans that there is stability, because we have to acknowledge that Turkey faces internal and external threats. Everything has also led to a decline of the economic performance. The recent political developments, keyword referendum, etc., have not really contributed to, so to say, harmonizing the society, quite the opposite. So from our perspective, we should have every interest to stabilize the situation, and I believe if we are now able to settle this accession issue, as it was decided by the foreign ministers a year ago, not to open any chapters so far, and now the Council have tasked us to, so to say, adjust our pre-accession funding to the current situation. If this is done, I think it gives us a kind of breath break then to relaunch a new era of cooperation with Turkey.
Very good. Thank you so much. We have, you need to go to the college in a moment, and I'm looking at your head of cabinet to see if we can take one or two questions. Thank you so much. Who wants to go first? Angela in the back there. Please introduce yourself, and very brief, and the Commissioner will need to leave in like 5 minutes.
Hello, Angela Wilkinson. I'm an independent, but I'm also the director at the World Energy Council. But my question is, I love the idea of a new collaborative neighbourhood. It seems to me that we need to invest more in shared vision. Not just the vision of, for example, Europe for Egypt, but the vision between Europe and Egypt. And I see a lot of policy development, but not a lot of investment in shared vision. So I would like a reflection on that, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela. Who else? Oh, it's a shy audience this morning. Okay. Then why don't you take that? Shared vision. What is the vision?
It's a good question, and I have hoped to have more time to reflect about it. But I think that ideally there should be a shared vision about the Mediterranean, yeah, because you cannot see Egypt only for itself. Just so to say, west of Egypt we have Libya, and then we have Maghreb, the least, so to say, developed region in the world in terms of cooperation, etc. I think a shared vision should be to, and this is my my so to say vision not only for the south, but also for the east neighborhood, to reduce as far as possible the gap between our welfare level and their welfare level, because this is something which is extremely important for us, but also for them. I think we have to focus on the economic development in all these countries, because the economic development can serve as a spearhead also for democratic developments. But this is something where some time is needed. But first and foremost, we have to address the most pressing issues, and these are things which are different from country to country. And once again, talking about Egypt, I think everything is around this issue of population growth. I was a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago in Egypt. I met President Sisi, Prime Minister, everybody, may I say, business people. By the way, they believe that, because I was there almost a year ago, that since that the economic situation has really improved, but without capturing in a way this most pressing issues, we won't make any progress. But also here, the economic development is so important, and I think this is something we have to stress, and this means that, for instance, and that's why I believe we need some leverage, many of these countries in our neighborhood have a very narrow economic basis in terms of the business sector. Turkey is heavily depending, for instance, on tourism. If there is one or the other attack, as we have seen, immediately there is a steep decline of tourists. And in Turkey, in Egypt, around, by the way, same applies for Turkey, in Egypt, around 10 million people out of more than 90 million are more or less depending on tourism. And in others, like in Algeria, which is very often forgotten, and we should not underestimate also here a potential threat to Europe. This country, like some others in our neighborhood, are very much depending on the selling of their resources. And if the price is not adequate, they face problems, because in all these countries we have a tradition to subsidize public goods and services. And this is the reason why I have started 2 years ago to coordinate ourselves with international financial institutions like World Bank, IMF, EIB, EBRD, to address certain deficiencies in countries together and to try to coordinate ourselves in terms of conditions. Some like to speak about incentives. I'm not, so to say, discussing this. What counts is the result. And here we have made progress. And by the way, here it was a little bit easier to coordinate us, and it could hopefully serve also as a role model for our own member states.
Very good. Before I let you go, I mean, the audience here, I don't know if you were there when I gave my introductory remarks.
But may I ask you,
ahead.
I would be very much interested to become inspired by you after these 2 days. So what could be shared visions and things like that? So it's not only to give input on my side. I hope to get input from your side.
Very good, and we're very pleased to give it. One of the things I was thinking when Angela was talking is, I mean, in China's engagement with Africa, I think there's a little bit of a shared vision, sort of, around mutual economic benefit and money without a lot of strings attached regarding good governance, etc., with what the Europeans usually come with.
This was, and I like to speak already a little bit in the past, the attractiveness of China. But we see that there are already the first countries where the Chinese, I wouldn't say kicked out, but so to say the enthusiasm about the Chinese engagement in some countries has gone down, because they come in with their own workforce. They produce something, they want to get something in return, but it's not really sustainable. And I'm always like to compare Europe with an, let's say, air carrier. it takes time to redirect us. Yeah? But once
you have,
then we can't be stopped. Yeah? And this is, I think,
very
something.
good. We take one last one by Jim Close, please.
Just make one
the-
remark about the vision thing. I don't need a microphone.
No, you do need a microphone, because otherwise the people in the back can't hear you.
Thanks a
Go
lot.
ahead.
I just want to make a remark about the vision thing. We had developed a very coherent vision with the Mediterranean countries. It's called the Barcelona Process, decades ago. The problem is, and you mentioned it in some way, that you need partners to do that. This was predicated on our kind of approach, not exactly enlargement, but enlargement inspired the values, the structures, the cooperation within the regions. The problem is, in the region to the southern part of the Mediterranean, they have never been interested in developing an inter-regional cooperation on their side. Yeah. And then this vision doesn't work. But it's not as though we hadn't developed the vision. We had one. It simply hasn't worked very well.
Yeah, but I would say, once again, I'm an, so to say, eternal optimist. Also there, I believe things start to change on the let's say, Arab side. And I, for instance, focus our activities in the Mediterranean very much on the Union for the Mediterranean. Why I'm saying this? Because in many of these rather challenging areas, we face a lot of institutions, activities, conferences, etc. I'm always saying almost every former minister has its own format, yeah? And this is, it's also a kind of industry. We were recently analyzing in West Balkan. There are at least what we could identify 90 regional activities and initiatives. Fortunately, only 6 are paid by us, the European Union. But this is an issue of streamlining, and the same is in a way in the Mediterranean. And I think here the Union for the Mediterranean could be, so to say, the platform which enable some kind of progress. But maybe finally, one of sort of our so to say, European intellectual founder, Aristoteles, said 50% of a solution is already to be astonished about something. And in that respect, maybe also food for thinking, I quote the Secretary General of the UFM, and he told me recently, if you take the members of the Union of the Mediterranean, which are the 28 EU member states and 14 Mediterranean countries, and if you take the trade volume of these 42 countries together and take it for 100, 90% of the trade is amongst the 28 member states. 7 to 8% is trade between the 28 and the 14, and 2 to 3 is trade between the 14. Yeah? And this includes partly West Balkan countries. So you see where are the deficiencies, what has to be done, and we are confronting them. And if we are able to stabilize a little bit the situation and to find solutions, there is a lot of untapped potential, definitely.
Very good. Let me just say this afternoon we're having a session on connectivity as a geopolitical and geostrategic game changer. So I'm sure we'll come back to some of your thinking then. We're out of time. I'm getting a sort of nasty looks here from the Chief of Staff. So we have to say goodbye to you. You have to go to the college now. But on behalf of all of us, I want to really warmly thank you. It was extremely interesting to listen to you. And off you go now. Thank you. Ja, vielen Dank.